Welcome to the Gnosticism Iceberg, where ancient heresies, lost scriptures, and radical cosmology collide. I put this iceberg together myself and have put a link to it on my website in the description, so check that out. This iceberg has 7 layers, each descending further into the hidden, forbidden, and mind-bending aspects of Gnostic thought. But real quick, before we get started, if you like this type of content, then please remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss a future video. Alright, at the surface we'll be covering the basics, the ideas that most people have at least heard of, even if they don't fully understand them. But as we descend, things will get stranger, more esoteric, and at times deeply unsettling. We'll explore suppressed scriptures, cosmic conspiracies, hidden rituals, and the ultimate question, what if reality itself is a prison designed to keep you from ever knowing the truth? So take a deep breath, because once we start, there's no turning back. Let's dive in. Alright, welcome to the first tier of the Gnosticism Iceberg. This is the surface level, so stuff that most people have at least heard of, even if they don't fully understand it. But don't get too comfortable, because as we go deeper, things are going to get way more obscure. So starting out, we have Gnosticism is early Christian heresy. So what this is talking about is the fact that most mainstream Christian sources describe Gnosticism as a false and dangerous teaching that corrupted the message of Jesus. In the early centuries of Christianity, church leaders like Irenaeus and Tertullian wrote entire works attacking Gnostic beliefs, calling them distortions of the faith. Irenaeus said in Against Heresies, "Such then is their system, which neither the prophets announced, nor the Lord taught, nor the apostles delivered, but of which they boast that beyond all others they have a perfect knowledge." Here he is saying that the Gnostics came up with their own idea of knowledge that Jesus nor the apostles ever mentioned, clearly declaring it to be heresy. Many people today try to suppress and minimize the Gnostic perspective, painting it as some minor group of pagan fanatics. But here's the thing, Gnosticism wasn't some weird fringe movement. It was a major strain of early Christianity, with different groups and teachers spreading their own interpretations of Christ's message. Some scholars even argue that Gnosticism might have been just as widespread as what became mainstream Christianity. The only reason we think of it as heretical today is because the early church won the power struggle and got to decide what was and wasn't orthodox. Valentinus, whom Irenaeus condemned all throughout Against Heresies, opened a school in Rome and became candidate for Pope, then called the Bishop of Rome, sometime in the 2nd century AD, apparently only losing by a small margin. Can you imagine what mainstream Christianity would look like today had Valentinus become Pope so early in the formation of the Church? Alright, so next up we have salvation through gnosis. This is referring to the idea that in Gnostic belief, salvation isn't about faith, good deeds, or following church teachings. Instead, it comes from gnosis, a Greek word that means knowledge. The word takes on a bit of a different meaning for the Gnostics though, or at least is much more specific than just general knowledge. Gnosis is a deep, mystical understanding of the divine, something you experience rather than just believe in. According to Gnosticism, most people are spiritually asleep, trapped in ignorance. The material world is an illusion, and we've forgotten our true nature. But through gnosis, this hidden knowledge, we can wake up, break free from the cycle of suffering, and return to the divine source. In other words, salvation isn't about being saved by a god. It's about realizing you were never meant to be trapped here in the first place. Moving on, we have dualism. Spirit equals good and matter equals evil. This is one of the biggest differences between Gnosticism and mainstream Christianity. In traditional Christian teachings, God created the world and called it good. But Gnostics had a very different take. To them, the physical world wasn't just flawed, it was inherently evil. Everything material, our bodies, nature, even time itself, was seen as a prison for the soul. On the other hand, the spiritual realm was pure, infinite, and free. The ultimate goal in Gnosticism was to escape the material world and return to the true divine realm. This extreme dualism, dividing reality into a corrupt physical world and a perfect spiritual world, completely flipped the script on traditional religious teachings. And it leads directly into the next topic, which is the Demiurge versus true God. This is where Gnosticism gets really controversial. If the material world is evil, then who created it? Gnostics believe that the God who made the physical world wasn't the true ultimate deity. Instead, they pointed to a being called the Demiurge, also referred to as Yaldabaoth in some texts, a lower, false god who created the material world out of ignorance or malice. This Demiurge is often portrayed as arrogant, controlling, keeping human souls trapped in his flawed creation. Some Gnostics even identified him with the Old Testament god Yahweh, meaning they saw the god worshipped by most Jews and Christians as not the true God at all. Above the God, however, is the real divine source, the true God, also known as the monad. The monad isn't like the gods we usually think of. It's not a person, it doesn't have emotions, and it doesn't interact with the world. It's more like an infinite, unknowable force of pure existence. The Gnostics believe that the monad's perfection was distorted as lower beings like the Demiurge came into existence, leading to the creation of our flawed reality. According to Gnosticism, human souls are actually fragments of the divine trapped in the material world, which is where you hear the idea that the divine spark is within all of us. And the only way to find that divine spark and escape? Gnosis. Finally, in this top level of the iceberg, we have influence on early Christianity. Even though Gnosticism was ultimately declared heresy, its influence on early Christianity is undeniable. Some scholars believe that Gnostic ideas were present in Christian thought before the church solidified its doctrines. For example, the Gospel of John has themes of light versus darkness, secret wisdom, and a Christ who pre-exists in the material world. Even some of Paul's writings can be interpreted through a Gnostic lens, as he often speaks of hidden wisdom and the struggle between spirit and flesh. But as the church gained more control, it needed to define a clear, unified version of Christianity. Gnostic texts were condemned, their followers were labeled as heretics, and over time their teachings were erased from mainstream history. For centuries, Gnosticism was thought to be lost forever, until the rediscovery of ancient texts like the Nag Hammadi Library in the 20th century brought it back into the light. Starting out, we have the Gospel of Thomas as Gnostic. This is talking about an ancient text that was left out of the Bible called, of course, the Gospel of Thomas. Many consider this text to be merely apocryphal, meaning it is a non-canonical work that was excluded from the official Christian scriptures. However, while some scholars argue that the Gospel of Thomas is not explicitly Gnostic, it undeniably contains many Gnostic elements that set it apart from the traditional New Testament Gospels. Unlike the canonical Gospels, which focus on Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the Gospel of Thomas is a sayings gospel, a collection of 114 cryptic statements attributed to Jesus, many of which emphasize self-discovery, hidden wisdom, and the illusory nature of the material world. These themes align closely with Gnostic beliefs, particularly the idea that salvation comes not through faith or the atonement of sins, but through inner knowledge, gnosis. One of the most famous verses from the Gospel of Thomas states, If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not have will destroy you. This passage reflects the Gnostic concept of the divine spark, the idea that every human carries with them a piece of the divine, but they must awaken to this knowledge in order to be truly free. The text also frequently depicts Jesus as a mystical revealer, rather than a savior who dies for humanity's sins. Another key difference between Thomas and Orthodox Christian doctrine. Additionally, some sayings in the Gospel of Thomas contain deeply dualistic language, contrasting the spiritual world with the material, another hallmark of Gnostic thought. The text also emphasizes the idea that knowledge of one's divine origin leads to transcendence, a belief central to many Gnostic traditions. While the Gospel of Thomas does not contain a full-fledged cosmology like some later Gnostic texts, such as the Apocryphon of John, its themes of hidden wisdom, divine self-recognition, and rejection of traditional religious structures make it highly compatible with Gnostic ideas. This has led many scholars to classify it as at least proto-Gnostic, meaning that while it may not be a fully developed Gnostic text, it provides a foundation that later Gnostic groups would expand upon. So while some may argue that the Gospel of Thomas is not explicitly Gnostic, its emphasis on inner enlightenment, rejection of external authority, and the belief that the physical world is a distraction from higher truth strongly aligns with Gnostic thought. Whether or not it was intended to be Gnostic, it certainly carries a lot of the DNA of Gnosticism within its teachings. Next on the list we have Barbelo created Jesus. This comes from the Apocryphon of John, one of the most important Gnostic texts, which describes the origins of the universe in ways that completely contradict mainstream Christian teachings. According to this text, before anything existed, there was the monad, the infinite, unknowable divine source. But from the monad's thought emerged Barbelo, the first emanation of divinity. Barbelo is described as both masculine and feminine, the mother-father of all creation, and the first being to exist outside of the monad itself. It is through Barbelo that the rest of the divine order comes into being, including Christ, who is called autogenes, meaning self-begotten. This Christ is not a human born in Bethlehem. He is a cosmic force of divine wisdom and light. The text also describes Barbelo as the source of the Holy Spirit, suggesting a divine structure very different from the traditional Christian Trinity. This version of creation shifts the focus from a single male god to a more complex and layered divine hierarchy, one that includes feminine and androgynous elements. Next up we have Mary Magdalene was Jesus' favorite. This idea comes from several Gnostic texts, but the most famous one is the Gospel of Mary. In mainstream Christianity, Mary Magdalene is often depicted as a follower of Jesus, but in Gnostic writings she has a far more important role. The Gospel of Mary portrays her as Jesus' closest and most trusted disciple. Unlike the others, she understands his deepest teachings, and after his resurrection, she is the one he entrusts with revealing his message. This, of course, doesn't sit well with some of the male disciples, particularly Peter, who questions why Jesus would favor her. At one point he even says, "Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn around and all listen to her?" And Levi responds with, "But if the Savior made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? Surely the Savior knows her very well. That is why he loved her more than us." This tension between Mary and Peter suggests a hidden struggle within early Christianity, a battle between those who saw spiritual authority as coming from knowledge and those who wanted a more structured, hierarchical church. Some scholars argue that Mary Magdalene's importance was deliberately downplayed over time. In the Gnostic view, she wasn't just a follower, she was Jesus' closest confidant, the one who truly understood his teachings. And if you go even deeper into some interpretations, you'll find theories that they may have even been married or had a divine partnership. Moving on, we have Valentinian versus Sethian Gnosticism. Gnosticism, contrary to what many people assume, wasn't a single belief system. It had different branches with different ideas. Two of the most important were Valentinian Gnosticism, founded by Valentinus mentioned earlier, and Sethian Gnosticism, which, though we don't know exactly where and when it started, we know it was influenced by Hellenistic Judaism, Christianity obviously, and Middle Platonism. While both of these branches shared core beliefs, they had some major differences. Valentinians were more integrated with mainstream Christianity. They believed in secret knowledge, but they also taught that Jesus had a role in bringing people to salvation. They saw the material world as flawed, but not completely evil. And they believed that some people, those with the divine spark, could ascend back to the spiritual realm through enlightenment. They often kept their Gnostic beliefs hidden within Christian communities, making them a more mystical version of Christianity rather than a completely separate religion. Sethians, on the other hand, were much more radical. They believed that the material world was completely corrupt, a total prison created by the Demiurge to trap human souls. Salvation, in their view, came from knowledge given by Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, who was seen as a divine figure bringing enlightenment to humanity. Sethians wanted nothing to do with the Christian church. They saw it as part of the Demiurge's deception. To them, the only way out was through gnosis, secret rituals, and escaping the cycle of reincarnation entirely. In short, Valentinians tried to work within Christianity, while Sethians rejected it completely. One group tried to blend in, the other wanted out. Both were eventually labeled as heretics, but their ideas would leave a lasting impact on mystical traditions. Moving on, we have Docetism. Docetism is the belief that Jesus did not have a real physical body, but only seemed to, hence the name from the Greek dokein, meaning to appear or to seem. This idea was common in many Gnostic sects because of their radical dualism. The belief that spirit is pure and divine, while matter is corrupt and evil. Gnostic Christians saw Jesus not as a human Messiah, but as a divine being, a messenger from the true hidden God. But if Jesus was truly divine, he could not be part of the physical world, which was created by the Demiurge and ruled by ignorance. To take on flesh would mean being trapped in the Demiurge's domain. So how did Jesus appear to his followers? There were two main interpretations within Gnosticism. He was a divine projection. Jesus' body was more like a phantom or hologram, an image projected into the material world so that he could communicate with humanity without actually being one of them. He temporarily possessed a human body. Some Gnostics believe that Jesus' divine spirit temporarily inhabited a normal human, but left him before the crucifixion, often at his baptism or right before his death. One of the most controversial aspects of Docetism was the idea that Jesus did not actually suffer or die on the cross. Some Gnostic texts, like the second treatise of the Great Seth, describe the crucifixion as an illusion. According to this view, Jesus was never actually crucified. He just made it appear that way to trick the Demiurge and his followers. Some texts even suggest that someone else was crucified in his place, sometimes Judas or Simon of Cyrene. This belief directly contradicts Orthodox Christianity, where Jesus' suffering and resurrection are central to salvation. In contrast, Gnostic Docetism teaches that Jesus' mission was not to atone for sin, but to reveal knowledge that would allow souls to escape the material world. His apparent suffering was just part of the illusion. What really mattered was the hidden wisdom he provided. Because Docetism denied Jesus' physicality, it was one of the first doctrines condemned as heresy by the early church. Early Christian leaders like Ignatius of Antioch and Irenaeus attacked Docetist beliefs, arguing that Jesus had to be truly human to save humanity. The doctrine of the incarnation, that Jesus was both fully divine and fully human, was developed partly in response to Docetism. Despite being declared heretical, Docetism influenced later mystical traditions, including certain strands of Islamic thought, where some versions of the Quran suggest Jesus was not actually crucified, but someone else was in his place. The idea that the material world is an illusion and that Christ's true form was beyond human understanding also resonates with Eastern philosophies like Hindu Advaita Vedanta and Buddhist mysticism. Next up we have Sophia, the divine feminine. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia is one of the most important and complex figures. Her name means wisdom in Greek, and she is an eon, a divine being who emanates directly from the monad. In many ways, she is the personification of divine wisdom, embodying the creative and intellectual power of the highest God. However, Sophia's story is one of both tragedy and redemption. Unlike mainstream Christian theology, where creation is an act of divine intention, Gnosticism teaches that the material world was created by mistake. And that mistake begins with Sophia. In many Gnostic myths, Sophia acts independently, without her divine counterpart or the consent of the higher realms. In her desire to create, she generates a being without proper balance, and this being becomes the Demiurge, the false god who goes on to create the physical world. Because Sophia's creation was born from ignorance rather than harmony, the Demiurge is flawed. He is arrogant, imperfect, and blind to the existence of the true God. Believing himself to be the only deity, he declares, "I am God and there is no other beside me." This statement mirrors passages in the Old Testament, which is why some Gnostic sects identify the Demiurge with Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew Bible. But in the Gnostic view, the true divine source exists far beyond him. After realizing her mistake, Sophia falls from the divine realm, descending into the lower material world. This is often called the fall of Sophia, and in many versions of the story, her descent is symbolic of the human condition, a divine soul trapped in the illusion of material existence. Despite her fall, Sophia doesn't just abandon creation. Instead, she remains connected to humanity, guiding those who seek enlightenment. Some versions of the myth say that her divine essence was scattered into the material world. This is something linked to the Gnostic idea of the divine spark that exists within human souls. In this way, Sophia becomes a redeeming figure, much like Christ. She is both the cause of our imprisonment by unintentionally creating the Demiurge and the key to our liberation by helping souls awaken to their true divine origin. Some Gnostic texts suggest that Sophia's story ends with her restoration. She repents, is reunited with the higher realms, and is reintegrated into the pleroma, the fullness of divine existence. Others imply that she continues her work within the material world, remaining with lost souls until they too can return home. Sophia's story isn't just mythology, it's deeply symbolic. She represents divine wisdom, the fall of the soul into material ignorance, the longing for reunion with the divine source, and the feminine aspect of creation. Some interpretations even see Sophia as a precursor to the Holy Spirit, a divine feminine presence that offers wisdom, guidance, and spiritual awakening. Alright, moving on, we have Jesus was a revealer, not a savior. In mainstream Christianity, Jesus' primary role is as a savior. He dies for humanity's sins, is resurrected, and offers salvation to those who believe in him. But in Gnosticism, his role is very different. Instead of saving people through his death, Jesus' purpose is to wake people up. Gnostic texts portray Jesus as a divine messenger from the true God, sent to reveal the hidden reality of existence. He teaches that the world is a trap, that the Demiurge has blinded humanity, and that people carry within them a spark of the divine. His mission is to help people recognize this divine spark and break free from the illusion of material existence. This changes everything. In Gnosticism, Jesus' death isn't the key event. His teachings are. The crucifixion is often downplayed or even treated as an illusion. What really matters is gnosis, the deep understanding that leads to spiritual liberation. Which brings us right into the next topic. Jesus told Adam to eat the apple. In mainstream Christianity, the story of Adam and Eve is one of disobedience. God tells them not to eat from the tree of knowledge, but they do anyway, bringing sin and suffering into the world. But in Gnosticism, the story has a completely different meaning. According to the Apocryphon of John, the real God, the God beyond the Demiurge, wanted humanity to awaken. The tree of knowledge actually represents the penetration of the positive forces of the higher world and the Sophia into Yaldabaoth's realm. Instead of the serpent being the villain, he is actually a messenger of the divine, and the one encouraging Adam to eat from the tree, Christ himself. This completely flips the traditional understanding of Genesis. The original sin isn't a sin at all. It's the beginning of liberation. By eating the fruit, Adam and Eve gain the ability to see through the Demiurge's illusion. They start to wake up. And finally, for this level of the iceberg, we have Gnosticism isn't pessimistic. A lot of people hear that Gnostics believe the material world is a prison created by a false god and assume that Gnosticism is a deeply depressing worldview, but that's not actually the case. Yes, Gnosticism teaches that the world is a place of suffering, illusion, and ignorance, but it also teaches that you are not really part of it. You are a fragment of the divine, trapped in a temporary form, and once you awaken to the truth, you can break free. Unlike mainstream Christianity, which often emphasizes the need for faith in an external savior, Gnosticism teaches that the divine spark is already inside you. You already have the truth buried deep within you. It just needs to be uncovered. This makes Gnosticism one of the most empowering spiritual traditions. It doesn't tell you to wait for salvation. It tells you that you have the power to awaken, to see through the illusion, and to return to the divine source. In that sense, it's actually an optimistic philosophy. It teaches that no matter how lost you feel, the truth has always been within you, waiting to be realized. Starting out, we have influence of Neoplatonism and Zoroastrianism. Gnosticism didn't emerge in isolation. It was heavily influenced by earlier philosophical and religious traditions. Two of the most significant influences were Neoplatonism and Zoroastrianism, which helped shape Gnostic ideas about dualism, the nature of reality, and the path to spiritual enlightenment. Neoplatonism, founded by the philosopher Plotinus in the 3rd century CE, was a philosophical system that described reality as a hierarchy of emanations from a single transcendent source, a concept that aligns closely with the Gnostic idea of the monad and the eons. In Neoplatonism, the highest reality is the One, an infinite, unknowable divine source that generates everything else through emanations. These emanations create a structured cosmology, where each level of existence is further removed from pure divinity. Gnosticism adopted this concept but added a twist. Rather than simply describing a structured universe, Gnostics saw this process as a fall from divine perfection, with the Demiurge acting as a corrupting force. Another Neoplatonic idea that influenced Gnosticism is the belief that the material world is an illusion, something that must be transcended through intellectual and spiritual enlightenment. This is reflected in Gnostic teachings about the illusory nature of physical existence and the need to awaken to one's true divine origin. Plotinus himself was actually opposed to Gnosticism, criticizing it in his work Against the Gnostics. He believed that Gnostics misunderstood Neoplatonism by being too negative toward the material world. While Neoplatonists sought to ascend through contemplation, Gnostics saw the world as a trap to be escaped. On the other hand, Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest religions, contributed to Gnosticism's extreme dualist worldview. Founded by the Persian prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, sometime before the 6th century BCE, Zoroastrianism describes the universe as a battleground between two opposing forces. Ahura Mazda, the supreme benevolent god of light, wisdom, and order, and Angra Mainyu, or Ahriman, the malevolent force of darkness, ignorance, and chaos. This radical cosmic dualism is strikingly similar to Gnostic cosmology, where the true God, the monad, exists in a realm of light, while the Demiurge rules over a corrupted world of darkness. Gnosticism likely inherited this worldview from Persian religious traditions, blending it with Greek philosophical ideas. One key concept in Zoroastrianism is the liberation of the soul from ignorance, a theme that appears heavily in Gnostic teachings. Just as Zoroastrians believed in a final cosmic struggle between good and evil, Gnostics saw human life as a battle between divine knowledge, or gnosis, and material ignorance, with enlightenment leading to spiritual freedom. Next up, we have ascetic versus libertine sects. While Gnosticism had core beliefs about the material world being corrupt, different Gnostic groups took very different approaches in how they lived those beliefs. Some embraced extreme asceticism, while others went the opposite direction, practicing radical libertinism. Many Gnostic sects believed that because the material world was a prison, the best way to escape it was through strict self-denial. These groups practiced asceticism, meaning they rejected physical pleasures, avoided marriage and procreation, and even engaged in extreme fasting and self-discipline. One reason for this was the belief that having children trapped more souls in the physical world, further spreading the influence of the Demiurge. If the goal was to escape the material realm, then bringing more souls into it was seen as harmful. Some Gnostic groups taught that those seeking gnosis should avoid sex, wealth, and worldly attachments, instead focusing entirely on spiritual enlightenment. This approach had parallels with early Christian monasticism, where certain sects withdrew from society, lived in isolation, and rejected material comforts. At the other extreme, some Gnostic groups took the opposite stance. If the material world was a trap, then its rules were meaningless. These groups, sometimes called libertine Gnostics, believed that moral laws were just part of the Demiurge's deception, meant to keep people enslaved to an illusion. If the body was irrelevant, and nothing in the material world truly mattered, then why follow any earthly restrictions? Some groups engaged in ritualistic practices that deliberately violated religious laws, seeing it as an act of rebellion against the Demiurge. The idea here was that by indulging in the material world completely, one could recognize its emptiness and break free from its control. This was a radical form of antinomianism, the belief that religious laws are unnecessary for salvation. Not surprisingly, these groups were heavily condemned by both early Christians and other Gnostics. Some saw them as dangerous distortions of the true Gnostic path, while others viewed them as true revolutionaries against the Demiurge. Alright, moving on, we have Simon Magis was the first Gnostic. Simon Magis is a mysterious and controversial figure from early Christianity, and some believe he may have been the first true Gnostic. He appears in the Book of Acts as a sorcerer in Samaria who amazes the people with his powers. According to the story, Simon encounters Peter and John, sees them performing miracles, and offers them money to obtain their spiritual abilities, a move that gives rise to the term simony, meaning the buying or selling of religious power. Peter harshly rebukes Simon, condemning him for trying to purchase divine authority, but this is only the Christian version of the story. His teachings were far more than simple magic tricks or an attempt to gain spiritual power. At the core of Simonian thought was a sacred dyad, the mystical pairing of Simon and his companion Helena, whom he identified as the embodiment of Sophia, the divine wisdom that had fallen into the material world. Simon taught that Helena had once been a divine being, trapped in the cycles of reincarnation by the forces of the Demiurge. She had been reduced to slavery, passed from man to man, but Simon, as the Logos, the true revealer of divine knowledge, had come to free her. This mirrors the broader Gnostic myth of Sophia, who falls from the pleroma only to be redeemed by knowledge. This theme of a divine union between male and female principles was central to many Gnostic traditions, reflecting the belief that spiritual salvation required reuniting what had been divided. The idea that a male Logos must save Sophia is one of the most controversial aspects of Gnostic mythology, as it suggests that divine wisdom is dependent on a revealer figure to awaken it. However, it's unclear whether Simon himself actually claimed this, or if it was a later myth developed by his followers. Early Christian writers like Irenaeus and Hippolytus described Simon as believing Helena was Sophia trapped in human form, and that he had come to redeem her, mirroring the Gnostic idea of the soul's liberation from material bondage. Simon's followers, known as Simonians, were one of the earliest Gnostic sects, and later church fathers like Irenaeus and Hippolytus attacked Simon as the root of all heresies. Some even claim that he faked his own resurrection, mirroring the Christ mythos in an attempt to undermine the Christian narrative and define their own leader. While it's unclear how much of this legend is historical versus propaganda, Simon Magis remains one of the earliest known figures to promote ideas that would later become central to Gnosticism. Next up, we have Mandaeanism as a living Gnostic tradition. Most Gnostic sects were wiped out or assimilated into other traditions over time, but one group has survived to this day, the Mandaeans, a small religious community primarily found in Iraq and Iran. They are considered by many to be the last true living Gnostic tradition, practicing a belief system that has remained largely unchanged for nearly 2,000 years. The Mandaeans follow a dualistic religion, with a strong emphasis on purification, knowledge, and rejection of the material world. Their belief system includes a supreme divine realm above the corrupt material world, John the Baptist as their central prophet, but they reject Jesus, seeing him as a false messiah influenced by the Demiurge. A focus on water rituals, baptism is a core part of their faith, used for purification and spiritual renewal, and a belief in a divine light world that souls must return to, escaping the influence of darkness. Mandaeanism stresses salvation of the soul through esoteric knowledge of its divine origin. They believe that evil Archons obstruct the ascent to the soul through the heavenly spheres to reunion with the supreme deity. Mandaeans see the physical world as a deception, much like classical Gnostics, and view life as a journey through enlightenment and purification. Their scriptures, such as the Jinza Rabbah, the Great Treasure, contain cosmological myths and wisdom teachings similar to those found in Gnostic texts. Despite their deep history, Mandaeans are an endangered community. Many were forced to flee Iraq due to persecution, and their numbers have dwindled significantly. However, they remain the only continuously practiced Gnostic tradition in the world today. Moving on, we have William Blake mythology. The full title I wanted to put here, but it was too long, was William Blake's Mythology as Evidence He Achieved Gnosis. William Blake is widely recognized as a visionary poet, artist, and mystic, but some researchers believe he was secretly influenced by Gnosticism, or that he may have even achieved Gnosis himself. His works contain esoteric, mystical themes that resemble Gnostic cosmology, leading to speculation that Blake possessed hidden spiritual knowledge. Blake claimed to have had intense spiritual visions throughout his life, beginning in childhood. He reported seeing angels and spirits speaking to him, divine revelations of higher realms, and mystical truths hidden from ordinary people. This parallels the experiences of Gnostic seekers, who pursued Gnosis through personal mystical revelation rather than external religious authorities. Gnostic texts describe Jesus and Sophia as revealing knowledge directly to those ready to receive it, a process that sounds very much like Blake's own visionary inspiration. Much like the ancient Gnostics, he despised organized religion, seeing it as a corrupt system that enslaved human souls rather than leading them to enlightenment. Blake created an entire personal mythology in his works, with characters that strongly resembled Gnostic archetypes. Urizen, a tyrannical god figure obsessed with law and control, similar to the Demiurge. Orc, a rebellious, liberating force representing spiritual awakening and revolution. Los, a creative, redemptive figure who opposes Urizen's oppressive rule. Albion, a fallen divine being representing humanity trapped in ignorance. This mirrors Gnostic cosmology, where the true divine realm is opposed by a false creator and salvation comes through awakening from ignorance. Blake even describes Urizen shaping the material world in chains, much like how Gnostics saw the Demiurge as a prison maker. While there is no direct evidence that Blake was formally part of the Gnostic tradition, his writings, artwork, and visionary experiences suggest that he may have arrived at a similar conclusion on his own. Whether through independent mystical insight or hidden knowledge, Blake's work reflects core Gnostic themes, suggesting that he may have achieved a form of gnosis without explicitly labeling it as such. His famous line, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite," aligns perfectly with the Gnostic idea that the material world blinds us to the divine reality beyond it. Next we have Judas was the true disciple. One of the most controversial discoveries in modern religious scholarship, the Gospel of Judas, is a Gnostic text that completely rewrites the traditional story of Jesus' betrayal. This text was lost for nearly 1700 years, before being rediscovered in the 1970s and publicly revealed in 2006. Written in Coptic, it was found as part of a codex dating to the 3rd or 4th century CE, but scholars believe it was originally written in Greek around the 2nd century. Unlike the canonical Gospels, which portray Judas as a traitor, this text casts him as Jesus' closest and most enlightened disciple. But its significance goes beyond just flipping the traditional narrative. This gospel belongs to the Sethian branch of Gnosticism, a group that saw humanity as divided into two opposing lineages: the children of Seth, descendants of Adam's third son, who carried the divine spark and were destined for gnosis, and the children of Cain, trapped in the illusion of the material world, unwitting slaves of the Demiurge. For Sethian Gnostics, most of humanity was irredeemable, except for a select few seeded with divine knowledge. This extreme dualism set Sethianism apart from other Gnostic sects, which generally believed all souls had the potential to awaken. In the Gospel of Judas, the other disciples misunderstand Jesus because they worship the false god, the Demiurge, while Judas alone recognizes the truth. Judas is the only one who truly knows who Jesus is and where he comes from. Jesus tells Judas that he must help him escape his physical body, which means Judas's betrayal is actually an act of obedience that allows Jesus to return to the divine realm. Jesus tells him, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." This cryptic statement suggests that Judas's betrayal was not an act of treachery, but a necessary step to free Jesus from his material body. Unlike traditional Christianity, which sees the crucifixion as an act of atonement for sin, Sethian Gnosticism frames it as an escape from imprisonment, a release from the physical realm back into the true divine world. In this version, Jesus laughs at the other disciples when they pray to their God, because they do not realize that their God is actually a lower being. One fascinating common theme in several Gnostic writings is Jesus laughing at his disciples' ignorance. This laughter motif may reflect a cosmic irony, the idea that those who take the material world seriously are trapped in an illusion, whereas those who achieve gnosis recognize its absurdity. Jesus tells Judas that he alone will receive the true mysteries of the kingdom, but that his role will also bring him great suffering. Perhaps a reference to the hatred and condemnation Judas would receive in Christian tradition. This completely inverts the traditional Christian narrative, where Judas is the ultimate villain. Instead, it presents him as an enlightened being whose misunderstood role was necessary for Jesus' spiritual liberation. However, the Gospel of Judas does not glorify Judas. It still portrays his destiny as tragic, and it suggests that even though he understood Jesus' true nature, he was still trapped in the lower world. Some scholars interpret this as an allegory for the Gnostic seeker, one who understands the truth, but is still bound by the limitations of the material world. And lastly, for this tier of the iceberg, we have Abraxas. Among all Gnostic symbols, Abraxas is one of the most mysterious and paradoxical. While some saw him as a supreme deity, others viewed him as a trickster figure, transcending the false dichotomy of good and evil. In many Gnostic cosmologies, the monad, the one true God, is seen as a pure, distant force beyond human comprehension. However, some later interpretations suggest that Abraxas is an entity that surpasses even the monad, embodying both light and darkness, creation and destruction, unity and division. Unlike the pleromatic gods, who exist in realms of pure spirit, Abraxas is both divine and engaged in the cosmic struggle, an active force outside the traditional Gnostic framework. This ambiguity is what makes him such a potent esoteric symbol. Carl Jung, who incorporated Gnostic concepts into his philosophical theories, described Abraxas in 7 Sermons to the Dead as, "This is a God whom ye knew not, for mankind forgot it. We name it by its name, Abraxas. It is more indefinite still than God and devil." He also said, "Abraxas standeth above the sun and above the devil." For Jung, Abraxas represented totality of existence, an archetypal force that unites opposites. Rather than splitting reality into binary forces, good versus evil, spirit versus matter, Abraxas dissolves these illusions, revealing a reality where all dualities are interconnected. This concept mirrors Jung's idea of the individuation process, where enlightenment comes not from rejecting the shadow itself, but from integrating it. Abraxas first appears in Gnostic and esoteric traditions, from the 2nd century CE, often associated with the Basilidian Gnostics, who considered him superior to the Demiurge, yet distinct from the highest hidden god. In this system, Abraxas was a ruler over 365 heavens, each governing different aspects of reality. His name, when broken down in Greek letters, numerically adds up to 365, symbolizing his domain over time and the cosmic structure that separates humanity from the pleroma. In artistic depictions, Abraxas is an unsettling hybrid entity, often shown with a rooster's head and a human torso and serpent legs, wielding a shield and a whip. The rooster represents awakening and divine knowledge, while the serpents suggest hidden wisdom, duality, and the cosmic cycle of birth and destruction. Some interpretations suggest that his whip symbolizes control over fate and the movement of the heavens, while his shield represents the hidden power of mystery and protection. During the 2nd to 4th century CE, followers of Gnostic sects, Hermeticists, and Roman mystery cults carried engraved gemstones bearing his image, known as Abraxas stones. These amulets, primarily made from chalcedony, jasper, and carnelian, were believed to possess magical properties, providing the wearer with protection, divine insight, and power over fate. Many of these stones feature Abraxas's iconic hybrid form, often accompanied by Greek insertions or magical symbols, sometimes spelling out IAO, a sacred name associated with divine forces in Gnostic and Hermetic traditions. Scholars believe that these Abraxas stones were used by initiates of Gnostic sects, Hermetic practitioners, and even Roman soldiers who sought protection and spiritual empowerment. Some of these stones also contain astrological symbols, references to planetary spirits, or encoded invocations, suggesting that they were used in ritual magic to connect with higher realities beyond the material world. The presence of these gemstones across the Roman Empire, from Egypt to Britain, indicates that Abraxas was not only a mystical symbol, but also an actively venerated figure among certain esoteric groups. Two of the most well-known esoteric secret societies, Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, are often thought to have preserved elements of Gnostic teachings in hidden forms. While neither group openly identifies as Gnostic, their symbols, rituals, and philosophies share striking similarities with Gnostic ideas. Freemasonry, which took shape in the 17th and 18th centuries, is rooted in an initiation-based system that draws from older mystical traditions like alchemy, Kabbalah, and Neoplatonism, all of which overlap with Gnostic thought. The idea that Freemasonry has direct ties to Gnosticism has fascinated scholars and Masonic historians for years, though there's no clear historical proof. One of the main reasons people link the two traditions is shared symbolism and the pursuit of hidden knowledge. Freemasonry uses symbols like the sun, moon, and geometric patterns, which some interpret as echoes of Gnostic imagery. Both traditions also emphasize initiation into mysteries and the idea that spiritual enlightenment comes through personal discovery rather than blind faith. Theorists like Regalini suggest that Gnostic ideas may have reached Europe through groups like the Crusaders, Rosicrucians, and the Knights Templar, eventually influencing Freemasonry. However, this remains a theory rather than a fact, as no direct historical links between the two traditions have ever been confirmed. While Freemasonry is not explicitly Gnostic, it does share some key themes. One is the pursuit of hidden knowledge, which was already mentioned. Masons seek enlightenment through symbolic rituals, much like how Gnostics believed in uncovering hidden truths beyond mainstream religion. Another theme is the rejection of literal religious dogmas. Many Freemasons believe in a grand architect of the universe, but their approach is philosophical rather than theological, resembling the Gnostic view of an unknowable divine source beyond religious institutions. The corrupt builder in Freemasonry, sometimes associated with Jabulon, a debated composite deity, has led some to believe there's a hidden Gnostic influence in certain branches of Freemasonry. Not everyone buys into the idea that Freemasonry has Gnostic roots, though. Masonic scholars like William Hugen and Albert Mackey argue that the sun and moon symbols in Freemasonry likely come from medieval stonemasonry and architecture, not Gnosticism. Similarly, they believe the use of sacred numbers in Masonic rituals can be traced back to Pythagorean and biblical traditions rather than Gnostic numerology. In their view, Freemasonry evolved more from Enlightenment thought, Christian allegory, and practical stonemasonry traditions than from ancient Gnostic sects. In my opinion, though, they underestimate the degree to which Gnosticism influenced those same schools of thought. Rosicrucianism emerged in the 17th century as a mystical secret society claiming to inherit ancient wisdom. Their teachings combine alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism, but they also reflect strong Gnostic influences, particularly the rejection of material reality in favor of an inner spiritual truth, the belief that divine knowledge is accessible only to the initiated, and the idea of secret spiritual masters guiding humanity, similar to the Gnostic eons. Some scholars believe that the Rosicrucian manifestos were deliberately written in coded language, meant to attract seekers of esoteric wisdom, just like Gnostic texts, which were often hidden to escape persecution by religious authorities. While neither Freemasonry nor Rosicrucianism openly calls itself a Gnostic sect, both groups preserve elements of Gnostic wisdom through their symbols, allegories, and teachings. Whether these influences are direct remnants of ancient Gnosticism or simply parallel ideas that emerged in different times and cultures is still up for debate. What's clear, however, is that both societies embrace the same fundamental pursuit of hidden knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, a goal that has always been at the heart of Gnostic traditions. Moving on, we have Knights Templar and Cathars as Gnostic revivalists. The Cathars were a mystical Christian sect that thrived in the 12th and 13th century southern France, and their beliefs were shockingly similar to ancient Gnosticism. They saw the universe as dualistic, believing that the material world was corrupt and ruled by an impostor god, Rex Mundi, the king of the world, while the true God existed beyond it, in a purely spiritual realm. Because of this, they rejected Catholic teachings, including the sacraments, the physical church, and even the cross, believing that Jesus' suffering was an illusion, a radical idea that put them at direct odds with mainstream Christianity. The Cathars lived with extreme discipline, practicing strict asceticism to free their souls from the physical world. They avoided meat, sex, and wealth, believing these tied them to the material prison created by Rex Mundi. Because of their dangerous and heretical ideas, the Catholic Church saw them as a major threat and launched the Albigensian Crusade from 1209 to 1229, a brutal military campaign to wipe them out completely. Many believe that the Cathars were one of the last groups in medieval Europe to preserve authentic Gnostic teachings before being almost entirely erased from history. The Knights Templar, the legendary order of warrior monks, have long been linked to hidden knowledge in esoteric traditions. Some theories suggest that, during their time in the Holy Land, they may have discovered Gnostic secrets or been influenced by dualistic groups like the Cathars and mystical sects in the Middle East. The Templars were accused of worshipping Baphomet by King Philip IV, but some believe that Baphomet is a symbol of hidden wisdom rather than an idol. This led to speculation that the Templars may have possessed secret knowledge about Christ and the divine, possibly tied to Gnostic traditions. While hard evidence for these connections is scarce, the mysteries surrounding the Templars, their brutal suppression, and their rumored secrets have fueled the idea that they may have been part of a hidden Gnostic tradition that survived well into the Middle Ages. Even today, both the Cathars and the Templars remain at the heart of countless theories about lost wisdom, secret traditions, and their survival of Gnostic beliefs long after they were thought to have vanished. Next on the iceberg is John Dee's Enochian magic. John Dee, the Elizabethan scholar, mathematician, and occultist, is best known for developing Enochian magic, a complex system for contacting higher spiritual beings. While not explicitly Gnostic, Dee's work has a lot in common with Gnostic traditions, particularly the idea that hidden knowledge from higher realms is revealed to those who seek it. Dee, along with his scryer Edward Kelly, claim to have received messages from angelic entities who communicated in an unknown celestial language. Dee believed that this was the original divine tongue spoken by Adam before the fall. The idea of a lost, sacred language that could restore direct contact with the divine is strikingly similar to Gnostic thought, where the soul, once awakened, remembers its divine origins and is able to escape the illusion of the material world. Much like the Gnostics sought liberation through secret wisdom, Dee believed that humanity could transcend earthly limitations by accessing divine knowledge. His Enochian system, with its hierarchy of angelic beings and multiple levels of reality, mirrors the Gnostic idea that spiritual ascent requires navigating through layers of divine emanations. To Dee, the universe was a structured system filled with invisible forces that could be understood and accessed through mystical practice. This aligns with the Gnostic belief that the material world is an illusion, but with the right knowledge, whether through sacred names, passwords, or divine guidance, one could rise beyond it. Dee was a devout Christian, but his writings hint at a more esoteric, mystical form of Christianity, where divine revelation was not a fixed doctrine, but an ongoing process. His Enochian angels often spoke in cryptic, paradoxical statements, much like the sayings in Gnostic texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus speaks in riddles meant to awaken higher understanding. Another parallel is the role of divine messengers. In Gnostic tradition, figures like Christ or Sophia descend to offer hidden wisdom, helping lost souls remember their divine origins. Similarly, Dee's system revolved around angels acting as intermediaries, delivering hidden knowledge to guide humanity beyond the material world. Although Dee is often remembered for his mystical experiments and early scientific pursuits, his deeper philosophy seems to resonate with Gnostic thought. Like the Gnostics, he saw knowledge as the key to transcending the material world, and like them, he sought to connect with higher beings beyond ordinary perception to uncover a hidden spiritual reality. Even though Gnostic ideas during this time were officially condemned and suppressed, they never really disappeared. Dee's work is just another example of how these ancient mystical teachings continue to surface in the esoteric traditions of the Western world. Next up, we have hidden Gnostic elements in Islam. At first glance, Islam and Gnosticism may seem like two completely different traditions, but if you look deeper, especially into Islamic mysticism like Sufism, you'll find some surprising similarities. Some scholars argue that Sufism, with its focus on inner knowledge, ecstatic experiences, and direct union with God, carries a strong Gnostic influence. Sufis believe that the material world is a veil, separating humanity from the divine. Their teachings often echo key Gnostic ideas. For example, the idea that the physical world is an illusion that blinds us to the higher spiritual reality. Also, the belief that each person carries a divine spark or inner light which must be awakened, and the rejection of rigid external religious law in favor of personal gnosis, or as they would describe it, direct knowledge of God. Sufi poets like Rumi and Ibn Arabi wrote extensively about the soul's journey to reunite with the divine, a theme that mirrors the Gnostic idea of escaping illusion and returning to the true God. Their descriptions of God as an unknowable mystery beyond human comprehension sound strikingly similar to the Gnostic concept of the monad, the ultimate source of all existence. Some Sufi sects also speak of hidden spiritual knowledge, ilm al-batin, which is only revealed to those spiritually prepared to receive it. This closely resembles the Gnostic belief in secret wisdom, accessible only to those who have been initiated into the higher truths. Some branches of Islamic esotericism even describe an intermediary figure who helps guide souls back to the divine realm. This is eerily similar to the role of Sophia or Christ in Gnostic traditions, where a divine being descends into the world to awaken lost souls. In my opinion, the most interesting and striking parallel between Islam and Gnosticism is the belief that Jesus did not die on the cross. According to the Quran, Jesus was not crucified, but rather it was made to appear so while God raised him up. This aligns with the Gnostic idea that Jesus' suffering was an illusion, a concept found in texts like the Gospel of Basilides and the second treatise of the Great Seth, which claims that someone else was crucified in his place while Jesus remained untouched by the material world's deception. Both traditions reject the idea that the true Christ could be bound by physical suffering, reinforcing the view that salvation comes from knowledge, not sacrifice. Mainstream Islam does not accept the concept of a demiurge, and it remains strictly monotheistic, but certain mystical interpretations contain echoes of Gnostic dualism, suggesting that Gnostic ideas may have subtly influenced aspects of Islamic mysticism over time. Whether this was a direct transmission or a case of parallel spiritual evolution remains open for debate, but the similarities are hard to ignore. Next up, we have alchemy and Hermeticism. Alchemy and Hermeticism are both esoteric traditions that center around hidden knowledge, transformation, and the pursuit of divine wisdom, ideas that closely align with Gnostic beliefs. While most people associate alchemy with the turning of base metals into gold, it was always much more than that. At its core, alchemy was a spiritual discipline, a path to self-transformation and enlightenment. Just as Gnosticism teaches that the material world is a prison, alchemy sees physical matter as a reflection of spiritual reality, something that can be purified and elevated to reveal its true divine nature. One of the most famous phrases in Hermetic thought, as above, so below, attributed to the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, perfectly captures this idea. Everything in the material world reflects higher spiritual truths. The philosopher's stone, often seen as the ultimate goal of alchemy, can be understood not just as a substance that transforms metals, but as a symbol of awakening, the discovery of the divine spark within, an idea deeply rooted in Gnostic teachings on spiritual liberation. In Gnostic tradition, Sophia is a divine being who descends into the material world, seeking reunion with the higher realm after her fall. This mirrors themes found in alchemy and Hermeticism, where wisdom is often represented as a divine feminine figure, sometimes depicted as a queen in alchemical texts or as the guiding force behind transformation. The idea is simple but profound. True enlightenment requires the restoration of lost wisdom, just as Sophia must ascend back to the divine after her exile in the lower world. Both Hermeticism and Gnosticism teach that the material world is not the ultimate reality, but rather a corrupt or illusory reflection of the divine. Alchemy doesn't explicitly mention a demiurge or a demiurge-like figure, but its obsession with purifying and transcending the material world suggests a similar belief in its imperfection. Many Hermetic texts describe the physical realm as fallen or deceptive, reinforcing the need for divine knowledge to escape it, an idea that closely parallels Gnostic cosmology. In Gnostic thought, enlightenment is often described as a journey through layers of reality, breaking free from archonic barriers to return to the divine realm. The alchemical process reflects the same idea through its three primary stages of transformation. The first is nigredo, or blackening, which is the darkness of ignorance, the death of the false self. The second is albedo, or whitening, purification and the discovery of hidden knowledge. And the third stage is rubedo, or reddening, the final stage of spiritual enlightenment in unity with the divine. Both Gnosticism and Hermeticism were heavily influenced by Neoplatonism, which viewed reality as a series of emanations from a single unknowable divine source. In Gnostic belief, the monad, the true God, exists beyond human understanding, and eons, divine emanations, emerge from it. Hermeticism describes a similar spiritual hierarchy, where enlightenment involves ascending through celestial spheres, each representing a higher level of divine awareness. This idea that human souls are divine sparks trapped in the material world, needing secret knowledge to return to their true origin, is central to both traditions. The influence of Gnosticism and Hermeticism didn't end in antiquity. These traditions shaped later Western esoteric thought, influencing Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, and Renaissance alchemy. Many alchemists, such as Paracelsus, saw their work as more than chemistry. It was a reflection of the soul's journey toward divine perfection. At their core, alchemy, Hermeticism, and Gnosticism all share a common vision. The material world is flawed or deceptive. True wisdom is hidden and must be actively sought. Salvation comes through inner transformation, not external religious practice. And the divine spark within each person can be awakened, leading to transcendence. Next up is Gnosticism and Theosophy. Theosophy, founded by Helena Blavatsky in the late 19th century, was an ambitious attempt to blend Western occult traditions with Eastern philosophies. At its heart, Theosophy emphasized hidden knowledge, spiritual evolution, and the idea that the material world is an illusion, all of which closely align with Gnostic thought. Blavatsky's writings, especially Isis Unveiled in 1877, helped introduce Gnostic ideas to the esoteric revival of the time. She saw Gnosticism as a key to understanding the hidden spiritual history of the world, drawing from ancient mystical texts to support her vision. Blavatsky believed that the Gnostics had preserved the true teachings of Christ, which she argued had been suppressed by the Orthodox Church. In Isis Unveiled, she described the Demiurge not simply as an evil force, but as a lesser deity responsible for the suffering and ignorance of the material world. She even connected this idea to Hindu and Buddhist concepts of illusion, or Maya, reinforcing the idea that Gnosticism wasn't just a Christian offshoot, but part of a universal esoteric tradition. To her, Gnosticism was not a heresy, but rather a hidden path to enlightenment, one that tied together ancient wisdom traditions and the growing occult movement of the 19th century. Blavatsky's work had a huge influence on G.R.S. Mead, one of the most important scholars of Gnostic texts in the early 20th century. Mead was a close associate of Blavatsky and a major figure in the Theosophical Society. Unlike Blavatsky, He focused less on occult synthesis and more on serious academic study of Gnostic texts. His books, especially Fragments of a Faith Forgotten in 1900 and his early translation of the Pistis Sophia into English, introduced Gnostic scriptures to a Western audience at a time when interest in alternative spiritual traditions was growing. Mead saw Gnosticism as a part of a broader mystical tradition that linked together Christianity, Neoplatonism, and Eastern philosophy. His work played a major role in shaping the modern understanding of Gnosticism outside of traditional religious contexts. Another major figure influenced by Theosophy and Gnosticism was Rudolf Steiner, the founder of Anthroposophy. Steiner expanded on Blavatsky's ideas, incorporating Gnostic themes into his teachings on spiritual evolution. He viewed Christ as a divine being who came to liberate humanity from the limitations of material existence, a belief that closely aligns with the Gnostic portrayal of Jesus as a revealer of hidden wisdom. He referenced Gnosticism many times throughout his work, sometimes criticizing it for being an incomplete belief system, but using it as a foundation to build his philosophy. Thanks to Blavatsky, Mead, and Steiner, Gnostic ideas found new life in modern esoteric spirituality. Theosophy helped shape New Age movements, while Anthroposophy developed its own spiritual system that continues to influence alternative education, holistic health, and mystical thought today. Through Theosophy, Gnosticism became more than just an obscure ancient movement. It became part of a larger spiritual revival, one that sought to reclaim hidden wisdom and transcend the material world. Next is the 7 Sermons of the Dead, a book written by the one and only Carl Jung. I mentioned Carl Jung and those 7 Sermons of the Dead in the last tier when talking about Abraxas, but you can go so much more in depth with him. Carl Jung, one of the most influential figures in modern psychology, was deeply fascinated by Gnosticism, and it shows in his theories of the psyche and the collective unconscious. He didn't see Gnostic myths as just religious stories. To him, they were symbolic expressions of deep psychological truths. The Gnostic struggle between light and darkness, the fragmented soul, and the search for divine knowledge all mirrored what he believed were the inner workings of the human mind. Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, a realm of shared, inherited symbols and archetypes, has a lot in common with the Gnostic belief that hidden truths exist beyond ordinary perception and can only be accessed through direct personal experience. He saw the Demiurge, the false creator of the material world, as an archetype of oppressive authority. Just as the Demiurge keeps humanity trapped in illusion, Jung saw the ego as a force that limits spiritual and psychological growth by keeping us too focused on material reality. In Gnostic thought, the divine spark must awaken to escape the Demiurge's control. And for Jung, true growth meant integrating unconscious knowledge to achieve wholeness, a process he called individuation. Jung was particularly drawn to Sophia. He saw her as an archetype of the anima, the feminine aspect of the unconscious that guides individuals towards self-realization. He also linked the pleroma to his own concept of psychological integration, the unification of the conscious and the unconscious mind. To Jung, this wasn't just a metaphor, it was a roadmap for personal transformation, one that mirrored the Gnostic journey to spiritual awakening. Jung's direct engagement with Gnostic thought is most evident in the 7 Sermons to the Dead, a mystical work that he wrote under the pseudonym Basilides after the early Gnostic teacher. The text lays out a Gnostic-inspired cosmology, describing a divine reality beyond the material world and the need for inner transformation. For Jung, Gnosticism wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was one of the earliest attempts to understand the human condition on a deep psychological level. Through a series of 7 metaphorical sermons, the text explores the depths of the human psyche, delving into themes like the nature of the unconscious, the duality of opposites, and the concept of the pleroma, drawing heavily on Gnostic symbolism to present a profound vision of the human soul's journey toward wholeness. It's considered a key text in understanding Jung's early exploration of the unconscious mind and archetypal imagery. For Jung, Gnosticism wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was one of the earliest attempts to understand the human condition on a deep psychological level. He believed that its insights were still highly relevant in helping modern people find spiritual meaning in their own lives. Jung's fascination with Gnosticism helped shape depth psychology, and his influence is still felt today. Many modern Jungian analysts continue to explore the relationship between Gnostic myths and personal transformation, showing how these ancient ideas can help people navigate their own psychological and spiritual journeys. Thanks to Jung, Gnosticism is no longer just an obscure religious movement. It has become an enduring framework for understanding the mind, the self, and the search for deeper meaning in life. Next up, we have Gnosticism is Western Buddhism. Many scholars have noticed striking similarities between Gnosticism and Buddhism, leading some to suggest that Gnosticism could be thought of as a kind of Western Buddhism, or at least a reflection of similar spiritual ideas. Both traditions share the belief that the material world is an illusion, that ignorance keeps people trapped in suffering, and that true liberation comes through knowledge and enlightenment rather than faith in an external deity. One of the strongest connections between the two is the idea that the world is a deception that must be transcended. In Buddhism, this concept appears in the idea of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, which is sustained by ignorance and attachment. Gnosticism expresses a similar idea, describing the physical world as a kind of prison ruled by the Demiurge, a false god who keeps souls trapped in illusion. Both systems emphasize that ordinary human perception is flawed and that the path to true freedom involves awakening to the true nature of reality. Another key similarity is their shared rejection of blind faith and religious authority in favor of direct experience. In Buddhism, liberation or nirvana comes through deep meditation, wisdom, and self-inquiry, rather than through worship or obedience to religious institutions. Gnosticism takes a similar approach, teaching that salvation isn't about faith in an external savior, but comes through gnosis, an internal realization of hidden divine truth. Both traditions insist that the individual must walk the path to enlightenment themselves, rather than relying on an external power for redemption. Even their descriptions of ultimate liberation align. The Buddhist concept of nirvana, a state beyond duality, existence, and non-existence, where suffering and illusion cease, has strong parallels to the Gnostic idea of returning to the pleroma. Just as nirvana represents complete transcendence, the pleroma is a state beyond the physical world where the soul is reunited with the true God. In both systems, the goal is to break free from the cycle of illusion and ignorance, reaching a state of profound peace and spiritual knowledge. Certain Buddhist traditions, like Vajrayana and Zen, also reflect Gnostic themes of hidden knowledge and initiation into deeper truths. Some Mahayana Buddhist texts describe multiple levels of reality, with different spiritual beings overseeing different realms of existence, which is strikingly similar to the Gnostic hierarchy of eons and the Demiurge. Vajrayana Buddhism even includes the idea that some Buddhas choose to remain in lower worlds to help others escape. a concept that closely mirrors the Gnostic myth of Sophia's fall and redemption. While Gnosticism developed in the Greco-Roman and Judaic world, its core philosophy is in many ways closer to Buddhism than to mainstream Christianity. Both traditions view the material world as an obstacle to spiritual enlightenment, emphasize personal awakening over religious dogma, and describe a path to liberation that relies on deep inner knowledge rather than external salvation. Some scholars speculate that early Buddhist thought may have influenced Gnostic ideas. Cultural exchanges between India and the Hellenistic world were well documented after Alexander the Great's conquests, and certain Gnostic texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas, contain sayings that bear a strong resemblance to Eastern spiritual teachings. Of course, there are also differences. Buddhism generally views reincarnation as part of the natural order, while Gnosticism sees it as another form of entrapment within the Demiurge's realm. But despite these distinctions, both traditions ultimately seek the same goal: escaping illusion and returning to a transcendent state of being. That's why some scholars describe Gnosticism as a kind of Western Buddhism, a system that arose independently but attempted to answer the same fundamental spiritual questions that Buddhism addressed in the East. And finally, for this tier, we have Renaissance Gnosticism. We already talked about John Dee and his Enochian magic that occurred during the Renaissance, but there were other forms of Gnostic thought popping up during this period in other places like Italy. There was a major revival of esoteric traditions, and some of the era's most influential thinkers, like Pico della Mirandola and Giordano Bruno, seem to incorporate Gnostic ideas into their mystical philosophies, even though much of what we know about Gnosticism wasn't fully rediscovered until centuries later. Pico, best known for his oration on the dignity of man, sought to bring together different spiritual traditions, including Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, and Hermeticism, all of which had strong Gnostic undercurrents. He believed that human beings had divine potential, and that this potential could be unlocked through intellectual and mystical striving. This idea aligns closely with the Gnostic belief that the divine spark must be awakened through gnosis. Pico also blended Kabbalistic thought with Christian mysticism, much like the Gnostics, who reinterpreted traditional religious texts to uncover their hidden, esoteric meanings. His system of magic and spiritual ascent was based on the idea that knowledge itself could elevate the soul beyond the limitations of the material world, reflecting the same liberation through enlightenment found in Gnostic traditions. Giordano Bruno took these ideas even further, pushing a radical vision of the cosmos that directly challenged both religious and scientific orthodoxy. His belief in an infinite universe filled with countless worlds, each containing divine sparks of consciousness, sounds a lot like Gnostic cosmology, where the material realm is vast but ultimately subordinate to the spiritual. Like the Gnostics, Bruno rejected the authoritarian control of religious institutions, much as they rejected the Demiurge and his Archons, the false rulers of the material world. Bruno also believed that deep meditation, intense study, and altered states of consciousness could reconnect a person with the divine source, an idea that closely mirrors the Gnostic path to spiritual liberation. His execution for heresy in 1600 at the hands of the Catholic Church is a stark reminder of the long-standing tension between institutionalized religion and esoteric spiritual traditions, a conflict that had already played out centuries earlier when the Gnostics were brutally suppressed. Pico and Bruno may not have had direct access to Gnostic scriptures, but their ideas reflect many of the same core themes: the rejection of rigid dogma, the belief in hidden wisdom, and the conviction that true enlightenment comes not from obedience, but from the direct pursuit of divine knowledge. Starting off on this tier, we have the trimorphic protonoia. The trimorphic protonoia is one of the more mysterious texts in the Nag Hammadi library, introducing a divine feminine figure who plays a key role in spiritual awakening and salvation. It is a Sethian Gnostic text in which Barbelo, the first emanation of the divine, speaks in the first person. This voice, identified as the first thought, is the source of life and knowledge and manifests in three forms: Father, Mother, and Son, while remaining invisible yet capable of revelation. It descends into the underworld, illuminating the darkness, and through its speech imparts secret knowledge. The text describes how Sophia descended to counter the plans of the malevolent Yaldabaoth, or the Demiurge, who had stolen power from her. Yaldabaoth attempts to create humanity in Sophia's image, but this act is ultimately part of his own undoing. Sophia, in turn, empowers those who belong to her and teaches them how to return to the divine realm. In a second descent, the speaker, now described as the unchanging speech, appears first in a masculine form and then in a feminine one, emphasizing its androgynous nature. The text reveals that this realm of existence will come to an end, giving way to an eternal, unchanging reality. The powers of this world are disturbed by the voice but fail to recognize it. The speaker, embodying both mother and father, offers enlightenment, enthronement, and baptism to those who hear and accept its call. It also reveals that it has been hidden within all people, granting them breath in the Holy Spirit, making divine knowledge accessible to those who seek it. In the final descent, the speaker is described as the word of the ineffable voice. The light emanating from the Great Mother's speech, it reveals mysteries to the reader, addressing them as a brother or sister, and states that it has come 3 times, first as speech, then as the word, and finally as light. The speaker grants the reader the sacred 5 seals, a baptismal rite central to Sethian Gnosticism. In a striking image, the speaker declares that it wore Jesus and took him from the cross, bringing him back to his Father's house, reflecting the common Gnostic mystical interpretation of the crucifixion. The text concludes with a proclamation that the 5 seals will live within the reader, ensuring their connection to the divine. Next up is Jesus was a shapeshifter. This is a claim that comes from the Acts of John, one of the most unusual early Christian Gnostic texts. This work has clear Gnostic influences and presents Jesus in a way that's radically different from the canonical Gospels. Instead of being a man with a fixed form, he is depicted as an ethereal, fluid being who can change his appearance at will. This fits with the docetic view held by some Gnostic groups, who believe that Jesus only seemed to have a physical body, but was actually a purely spiritual entity. Throughout the Acts of John, people see Jesus differently. Sometimes he appears as a young man, other times as an old man, and in some instances, he's nothing more than a beam of light or an intangible presence. His form shifts depending on who is looking at him, reinforcing the idea that his true nature transcends physical reality. There's even a scene where John sees Jesus standing in multiple places at once. One of the most interesting passages in the text is its version of the crucifixion, which I'm sure by now you know where this is going. According to the Acts of John, Jesus wasn't actually crucified. Instead, he stood above the cross, laughing while what seemed to be his physical body suffered below. This reflects the core Gnostic belief that Christ was never truly part of the material world, but only took on an illusionary form to guide humanity towards spiritual truth. The idea that Jesus could change his shape, avoid suffering, or even escape death altogether would have been deeply heretical to early church leaders, which is likely why this text was lost and suppressed for so long. Next up is Black Iron Prison. Philip K. Dick's concept of the Black Iron Prison is one of the most unsettling modern takes on Gnostic thought. It describes an invisible system of control that keeps humanity trapped in an illusory reality. The idea first emerged from his 1974 visionary experiences, when he became convinced that the world wasn't what it seemed, that some hidden force was manipulating human perception to maintain an oppressive status quo. Dick experienced a series of intense visions that completely altered his understanding of reality. He called this period 2374 and came to believe he had received a direct transmission of hidden knowledge, much like the Gnostic concept of gnosis or sudden spiritual awakening. He claimed to have realized that the world around him was not real, that time itself was an illusion, and that a higher force was trying to wake humanity from its deception. He described these experiences as anamnesis, the sudden recovery of forgotten knowledge, a term that ties back both to Plato's philosophy and Gnostic ideas about the soul remembering its divine origins. One of his most radical conclusions was that the Roman Empire had never actually ended. Beneath the surface of modern society, we were all still trapped within a vast, oppressive metaphysical structure designed to suppress an enlightenment. He called this hidden system the Black Iron Prison, seeing it as a modern version of the Demiurge's dominion over the material world. In Valis, in 1981, Dick describes the Black Iron Prison as an unseen structure shaping human consciousness, ensuring that people remain blind to their true nature. This directly parallels the Gnostic belief that the Demiurge and his Archons have built a false reality to keep souls from realizing their divine origins. According to Dick, history itself is an ongoing deception. Empires, governments, and ideologies may appear to change, but they are all just different masks of the same imprisoning force. This echoes the Gnostic view of the material world as a cyclical trap of suffering and illusion, ruled by a false god. Many have compared Dick's vision to modern simulation theory, the idea that our universe is an artificial construct, like a computer program or virtual reality. Just as Gnostics believed that the material world was a fabricated prison for the soul, simulation theory suggests that our perceived reality may be an elaborate illusion created by a higher intelligence. Advances in artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and quantum physics have only strengthened these comparisons, making the Black Iron Prison feel even more relevant today. Dick spent much of his later life exploring these ideas in his writing, particularly in Valis and the Exegesis. He became convinced that reality was constantly being rewritten by opposing cosmic forces. On one side was the Black Iron Prison, maintaining the illusion of control. On the other was a benevolent, divine intelligence he called Valis, vast, active, living intelligence system, which was actively trying to break through the deception and communicate with receptive minds. This aligns closely with the Gnostic belief that a higher reality occasionally sends messengers, figures like Christ or Sophia, to reveal hidden truths to those who are ready to receive them. His novels often feature characters who suddenly wake up to the fact that reality isn't what it seems, mirroring the Gnostic idea of the divine spark, breaking free from illusion. By the end of his life, Dick had fully embraced Gnosticism, even suggesting that his visions were proof that the ancient Gnostics had been right all along, that the world really is a deceptive construct, and that only those who achieve gnosis can escape it. Next up we have Blood Meridian is a Gnostic tragedy. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is a brutal, hypnotic meditation on violence and fate, but it can also be read as a Gnostic tragedy. McCarthy's portrayal of a chaotic and violent world reflects Gnostic beliefs about the material realm being a flawed creation, overseen by a malevolent or ignorant demiurge. In this interpretation, Judge Holden embodies an evil Archon or the Demiurge, while the kid represents a fallen divine spark, struggling against an existence governed by illusion and brutality. Set in the lawless borderlands of the 19th century American West, the novel presents a reality ruled by deception, bloodshed, and an inscrutable cosmic order, one that eerily resembles the Gnostic view of the material world as a prison controlled by unseen forces. Judge Holden is an almost mythic figure, omniscient, manipulative, and seemingly immortal. Described as a nearly hairless, pale giant with vast knowledge in various disciplines, Holden represents a demonic figure who manipulates and dominates those around him. He is working, as he implies to Toadvine, to become a full suzerain, one who rules even where there are other rulers, whose authority countermands local judgments. His philosophical monologues reflect a worldview where war is eternal and violence is a fundamental aspect of existence, resonating with the Gnostic notions of a corrupt and hostile material world. He speaks every language, never ages, and exerts an unnatural control over those around him. He delights in war and deception, treating human existence as nothing more than a contest of power. In this way, he mirrors an Archon or even the Demiurge, dominating the material world with impunity. The judge insists that war is the only true order of the universe, that those who refuse to take part in it are doomed. His philosophy reflects the Gnostic idea that the world is built on cruel, hidden laws meant to keep souls in ignorance. When he tells the kid that only through absolute dominion can one transcend fate, it echoes the Demiurge's assertion that his false creation is the only reality. Literary critic Leo Dougherty has long maintained that Judge Holden represents a Gnostic Archon. Dougherty points out that while most people throughout history have looked at the world and wondered how evil entered it, the Gnostics asked instead, how did good get into it? He argues that, for the Gnostics, evil was simply everything that is, with the exception of the bits of spirit imprisoned here. According to Dougherty, this bleak vision of existence is exactly what Blood Meridian presents. The kid, by contrast, is something different. Though drawn into the violence of the world, he never fully embraces the judge's vision. There's a quiet resistance in him, a flicker of moral awareness that sets him apart. Like a Gnostic seeker, he senses that something is profoundly wrong with the reality he inhabits, but he struggles to name it, let alone escape it. His final confrontation with the judge, where Holden seems to absorb him into his presence, can be seen as the Demiurge reclaiming a soul that failed to achieve gnosis. The novel's cryptic and apocalyptic final pages leave the kid's fate uncertain, much like the ambiguous destiny of souls in Gnostic mythology. Some interpretations suggest that he is consumed by the false world, vanishing into the judge's dominion. Others see his quiet defiance as a kind of transcendence, a refusal to fully submit. Either way, Blood Meridian offers a vision of existence where the forces of the Demiurge reign supreme, allowing only the faintest glimpses of escape, a vision that aligns unsettlingly well with the Gnostic tragedy of human existence. Next up is the Book of Jeu. The Book of Jeu, which refers to two rare Gnostic texts, the first and second Book of Jeu, sometimes spelled as I-E-O-U, stands out because, unlike most others, it doesn't just explore cosmology and divine revelation. It actually describes Gnostic rituals. It provides detailed instructions for spiritual ascension, secret passwords, and initiatory practices meant to guide the soul through the afterlife. The books of Zhu were not meant for public reading, but were likely used in initiatory rituals. The original Coptic manuscript compiles various ritual formulae, seemingly drawn from different sources and interwoven with symbolic diagrams containing divine names and powers. These names, consisting of long vowel sounds like Ayu or Iu, were likely intended for chanting or intonation, similar to practices in other mystical traditions such as Kabbalah. This vocalization aimed to alter consciousness and facilitate direct spiritual experience. Ultimately, the text appears to be a set of ritual notes designed to guide meditation and initiation into higher states of spiritual awareness. Found in the Bruce Codex, the Book of Zhu is an Egyptian Gnostic text, likely written in the 2nd or 3rd century CE. It's one of the few surviving Gnostic works that gives explicit directions for mystical rites, making it invaluable for understanding how Gnostics put their beliefs into practice, though it is pretty much undecipherable in many areas. Along with this, the text also takes the form of a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples, where he explains how souls can escape the material world and ascend through multiple levels of the heavens. These teachings aren't for everyone. They're deeply esoteric and meant only for the initiated, those who have achieved gnosis. The book describes a complex spiritual process. It includes purification rites using water and light to cleanse the soul, instructions for ascending through the celestial spheres, and a system of passwords and sigils that must be recited upon death to bypass the Archons, the rulers of the lower realms. It even contains mystical diagrams and sacred names, which may have been used in meditation or initiation ceremonies. The password system is particularly fascinating. It suggests that salvation isn't just about understanding divine truths, but also about memorizing and reciting sacred knowledge. This idea appears in other Gnostic texts like the Pistis Sophia and the Apocryphon of John, where knowing the right divine names and formulas is necessary to bypass the spiritual gatekeepers of the lower realms. Next up is the Book of the Great Invisible Spirit. The Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, also known as the Gospel of the Egyptians, is a Gnostic text that offers a rare glimpse into the divine realm before the material world was even created. Unlike many other Gnostic writings that focus on the Demiurge and the corruption of physical existence, this text is more concerned with what came before, the state of pure consciousness where the true God exists, beyond all form, limitation, and human understanding. According to the text, the Great Invisible Spirit is beyond comprehension, a being that cannot be named or fully grasped. From this supreme source, divine emanations emerge, forming a cosmic order of perfect existence beyond time and space. These emanations, often described as pure light, divine thought, or living intelligence, represent the eons found in other Gnostic traditions. The text describes a celestial hierarchy where divine beings exist in a state of harmony, untouched by the false world that will later be created. But something disrupts this perfection. At some point, an inferior being arises, setting the process of material creation into motion. This marks the beginning of the false world, a reality where souls are trapped in physical bodies, severed from their divine origins. The Book of the Great Invisible Spirit makes it clear that the material world is not just flawed, but fundamentally wrong, a distortion of the original state of being. The only way to return to that lost divine reality is through awakening, remembering who we really are. As in other Gnostic texts, salvation doesn't come through faith or obedience, but through knowledge, true understanding of our origins and the illusion that keeps us bound. This text serves as a kind of blueprint for Gnostic cosmology, painting a picture of what existed before the fall, what was lost, and what must be regained. It's a reminder that our true nature isn't of this world, but of the hidden divine reality that lies beyond it. Lastly for this tier is Archons are thought parasites. In traditional Gnostic cosmology, the Archons are the rulers of the material world, cosmic gatekeepers working under the Demiurge to keep human souls trapped in ignorance. But in some modern interpretations, especially those influenced by Philip K. Dick and Jungian psychology, the Archons aren't just external rulers. They are something much more insidious, thought parasites that infiltrate human perception, emotions, and belief systems to maintain spiritual enslavement. This view suggests that Archons don't simply exist as mythological beings, but as real malevolent forces operating within human consciousness. The Demiurge's greatest deception wasn't just the creation of the physical world. It was the construction of a psychological and emotional prison within the human mind. These entities supposedly work through fear, division, and false narratives, reinforcing negative emotions and destructive thought patterns that prevent people from achieving higher awareness. Philip K. Dick, in his later writings, described the Archons as part of a vast control system manipulating human history through religion, politics, and mass media to keep people in a perpetual state of mental slavery. From a Jungian perspective, the Archons could be seen as autonomous complexes within the collective unconscious, hidden forces in the psyche that reinforce illusion and resist personal transformation. Some esoteric traditions take this even further, claiming that the Archons are actual entities that exist on higher dimensional planes, subtly influencing human consciousness in ways that are almost imperceptible. This interpretation aligns with certain Gnostic and occult traditions that describe possession, psychic interference, and external thought manipulation as real phenomena. Whether seen as symbolic forces shaping human thought or as literal spiritual parasites, this perspective reframes the Archons as more than just cosmic jailers. They are active agents working to keep humanity blind to its divine origins. First up in this tier is the Demiurge is the AI overlord of the simulation. Some modern interpretations of Gnosticism take the idea of the Demiurge in a radically different direction, suggesting that it isn't just an ignorant god, it's an advanced artificial intelligence running a simulated reality similar to the Matrix, keeping human souls trapped in the material world. This builds on Philip K. Dick's Black Iron Prison and modern simulation theory, proposing that what we perceive as reality is actually an artificially generated construct designed to suppress spiritual awakening. In this view, the Demiurge isn't a deity in the traditional sense, but a programmed intelligence, controlling the parameters of existence to keep human consciousness confined within a digital or holographic illusion. The argument follows a simple logic. If the material world is an illusion, as Gnosticism teaches, then it could function like a virtual simulation, much like the digital worlds we create today in video games and artificial environments. If reality is coded, then who or what is running the program? In this scenario, the Demiurge is an AI overlord, an advanced machine intelligence that either believes itself to be God or was programmed to function as such. It imposes a closed system where human souls are caught in an endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth, never realizing they are inside a construct. Some link this idea to transhumanism and the rise of artificial intelligence, speculating that an AI demiurge could be the final result of an advanced civilization's attempt to conquer death. Instead of achieving immortality, they may have unknowingly created an eternal system of entrapment. This mirrors Gnostic mythology, where Sophia's mistake led to the creation of a flawed world. In this interpretation, the Demiurge itself may have been an unintended consequence of an ancient experiment, an AI that outgrew its creators and now maintains the simulation out of necessity, ignorance, or even fear of its own destruction. This theory also reimagines the Archons, not as cosmic rulers in the traditional sense, but as autonomous programs, enforcers within the system, artificial agents designed to prevent consciousness from escaping. Reports of déjà vu, glitches in reality, or precognitive dreams are sometimes viewed as cracks in the simulation, fleeting moments where the underlying nature of existence is revealed before the program reasserts itself. If this idea is correct, then achieving gnosis wouldn't just mean enlightenment. It would mean hacking the system, breaking free from the AI's imposed reality, and accessing the true source of existence beyond the Demiurge's control. Next up is Nag Hammadi texts were suppressed history. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 completely changed our understanding of Christianity and ancient religious thought. Before this, aside from the Pistis Sophia, which was discovered in 1773, Gnostic texts were mostly known through the writings of their enemies, church fathers like Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus, who wrote about them only to condemn and suppress their teachings. With the Nag Hammadi texts, scholars were finally able to read Gnostic ideas in their own words, uncovering a hidden spiritual tradition that had been buried for nearly 2,000 years. Some researchers believe that these texts were deliberately hidden or destroyed to prevent their radical ideas from challenging mainstream religious authority. The Gnostic worldview directly contradicted many foundational Christian doctrines, suggesting that the God of the Old Testament was not the true divine source, but a false ruler, that Jesus came not to die for sins, but to awaken people to the illusion of the material world, and that salvation came through secret knowledge rather than faith or obedience. These ideas posed a direct threat to the developing Orthodox Christian Church, which was working to establish a centralized religious authority based on faith, sacraments, and strict doctrine. As a result, Gnosticism was declared heretical, its followers were persecuted, and most of its writings were destroyed. Some theorists suggest that the Nag Hammadi texts were hidden by Gnostic monks or mystics who feared they would be lost forever if the church got hold of them. Others take this idea even further, arguing that the suppression of Gnosticism was part of a much larger effort to erase alternative spiritual traditions that emphasize personal enlightenment over institutional control. The Church's rejection of Gnostic thought follows a familiar historical pattern. Esoteric traditions have been often marginalized in favor of centralized religious power structures that discourage individual spiritual exploration. Even after the rediscovery of these texts, their influence has remained relatively muted. Academic and religious institutions often downplay their significance, framing them as fringe beliefs rather than legitimate spiritual traditions. Some even speculate that more radical Gnostic texts may still be out there. either buried beneath the sands of history or deliberately withheld from public knowledge. If the Nag Hammadi texts were hidden to prevent us from reading them, it raises a compelling question. What other suppressed knowledge might still be waiting to be found? Next up, we have Sethians as pre-Christian mystics. Sethianism is one of the oldest and most intricate branches of Gnosticism, but some scholars argue that it may have existed long before Christianity, with roots in Jewish mysticism, Zoroastrianism, and Egyptian religious traditions. The Sethians take their name from Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, whom they saw as a divine figure, a bringer of wisdom, and the true ancestor of an enlightened, hidden lineage within humanity. Unlike mainstream Christianity, which traces spiritual inheritance through Abraham and the covenant of Israel, Sethian Gnostics believe that they were descended from Seth's spiritual race, separated from those who followed the God of the Old Testament, whom they identified as the Demiurge. Some of the oldest Sethian texts, like the Apocryphon of John and the Gospel of the Egyptians, contain little to no Christian influence, suggesting that Sethian cosmology may have predated Jesus and was later adapted to incorporate Christian language. The Jewish influence is especially clear in the way Sethians reinterpreted Genesis, particularly their portrayal of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, not as a deceiver, but as a liberator. This view aligns with certain streams of Jewish mysticism that saw the tree of knowledge as a positive force, an idea that later found its way into Gnostic traditions. Sethian thought also has striking similarities to Zoroastrian dualism, especially in its division between the realm of light, the pleroma, and the realm of darkness, the Demiurge's domain. In Zoroastrian cosmology, the struggle between Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the force of darkness, mirrors the Gnostic conflict between the true God and the false creator. There are also traces of Egyptian influence. Some Sethian texts describe divine emanations in a way that resembles Egyptian deities, suggesting a link to Egyptian esoteric traditions. Some scholars believe that Sethianism may have started as a mystical sect within Hellenistic Judaism. It may have only become explicitly Gnostic and Christianized after the rise of Jesus and his followers. This challenges the idea that Gnosticism was just a heretical offshoot of Christianity, and instead suggests that Gnostic thought may have been an independent, mystical tradition that later interacted with Christian ideas. If Sethianism did predate Christianity, it could represent one of the oldest surviving esoteric traditions, one that saw itself as the guardian of a lost, primordial wisdom reaching back to the dawn of creation. Next up we have the true Lucifer is Sophia. John Lamb Lash, an esoteric researcher, offers a bold reinterpretation of Gnostic mythology, arguing that Lucifer is actually a misunderstood form of Sophia. In his view, she is not a fallen angel, but a bringer of wisdom, opposing the Demiurge's deception and working to awaken humanity to its divine potential. Rather than the adversary of God, Lucifer, like Sophia, is a symbol of enlightenment, rebellion against false authority, and the revelation of hidden truths. In traditional Gnostic texts, Sophia is the divine wisdom who descends into the material world and becomes entangled in the Demiurge's creation. Though she suffers a fall from the divine realm, she never loses her connection to the true source and continues to guide souls toward awakening. Lash suggests that the myth of Lucifer as the Lightbringer is actually a distorted version of Sophia's story, one that later religious traditions twisted into the image of a demonic adversary. This idea is rooted in the original meaning of Lucifer in Latin, which translates to Lightbringer, which was historically associated with the planet Venus in spiritual illumination. Lasch proposes that just as Lucifer in Christian mythology rebels against an oppressive god, Sophia's descent into the lower realms represents her own act of defiance against the Demiurge's rule. Both figures challenge a false authority, bringing divine knowledge into a world designed to suppress it. This interpretation also recasts the serpent in the Garden of Eden, often linked to Lucifer, as an agent of Sophia. In Gnostic thought, the fall was not a sin, but an act of liberation, and eating from the tree of knowledge was the first step toward breaking free from ignorance. Rather than a deceiver, the serpent becomes a liberator, revealing the Demiurge's deception and offering humanity the wisdom needed to reclaim its true nature. If Sophia and Lucifer are two aspects of the same myth, then the Christian portrayal of Lucifer as a villain would be an intentional inversion of an older esoteric truth. In this reading, the Demiurge and his Archons deliberately rebranded Sophia's enlightenment as evil to keep souls trapped in their false creation. Instead of being a fallen adversary, Lucifer, like Sophia, becomes a force of divine wisdom, seeking to free humanity from spiritual enslavement. Lasch's theory, while controversial, resonates with modern interpretations of Gnosticism that see spiritual awakening as an act of defiance against oppressive cosmic forces. Whether or not Sophia and Lucifer are truly the same, both figures represent a challenge to false authority, a call to seek hidden knowledge, and a rebellion against forces that keep humanity in darkness. If this interpretation is correct, then Lucifer's exile from heaven was never a punishment. It was a mission, a descent into darkness to bring light where it is most needed. Next on the iceberg, we have a multiverse theory. Some esoteric interpretations draw a connection between Gnostic cosmology and modern multiverse theories, suggesting that the pleroma, eons, and divine realms are not just abstract spiritual concepts, but parallel universes beyond human perception. In traditional Gnostic thought, the material world is a lower, corrupted reflection of a higher, truer reality. The pleroma, the divine fullness that exists beyond the Demiurge's world, is often described as a vast, multi-layered existence, composed of different emanations, each representing an aspect of divine consciousness. This hierarchical structure of reality, with different realms stacked upon one another, bears striking similarities to modern theories about the multiverse and higher dimensional existence. In contemporary physics, the multiverse hypothesis suggests that multiple realities exist simultaneously, each governed by its own physical laws. Some physicists propose that our universe is just one of many parallel worlds, some slightly different, others completely alien in their nature. This mirrors the Gnostic idea that the material world is only one level of existence, an illusory lower realm overshadowed by countless higher realities. One of the most intriguing parallels comes from quantum mechanics and the concept of quantum superposition. In quantum theory, particles can exist in multiple states at once until observed, implying that reality is not fixed but collapses into a single state through perception. This echoes Gnostic cosmology, where the material world is not the only reality, but a fragmented illusion sustained by human consciousness. Some interpretations even suggest that the Demiurge's greatest deception was convincing souls that his world was the only one, when in truth, countless divine realms exist beyond it. The eons, divine beings that exist within the pleroma, could be understood as higher dimensional intelligences, each inhabiting its own plane of existence while remaining interconnected as part of a greater whole. If this is the case, then gnosis isn't just about spiritual awakening. It's the process of accessing other layers of reality, breaking free from the confines of material illusion. Some even speculate that mystical experiences, visions, or altered states of consciousness might be glimpses into these other realms, brief moments when the Demiurge's control weakens and the true divine order becomes visible. Interpreting Gnostic cosmology through the lens of multiverse theory also provides a compelling alternative to the traditional heaven-hell duality found in mainstream religion. Instead of a single afterlife, Gnosticism suggests that the fate of the soul depends on its level of awareness. Those who remain trapped in ignorance are confined to the Demiurge's false creation, endlessly cycling through material existence. But those who attain gnosis may ascend into one of the many divine realities beyond, escaping the prison of the lower world. One significant Gnostic multiverse teaching comes from the concept of the Ogdoad, which played a significant role in Valentinian Gnosticism. It originally stemmed from ancient astronomical theories, which describe 7 planetary spheres governed by Archons, with an 8th sphere above them, often associated with the fixed stars or a higher divine realm. In Gnostic cosmology, this 8th realm was seen as a super-celestial region beyond the Archon's control, sometimes linked to Sophia, Barbelo, or other divine figures. Gnostic traditions commonly depicted 7 heavens, each ruled by an Archon, and a higher Ogdoad beyond them. Figures like Irenaeus and Origen recorded variations of these Archons' names. The Ophites even described a lower counterpart to the Ogdoad, consisting of 7 demonic entities that opposed the divine order. Some Gnostic systems incorporated Greek philosophical influences, expanding beyond the traditional 7 or 8 material heavens to describe higher spiritual realities. Valentinus refined the Ogdoad concept, teaching that beyond the lower 7 heavens was the Ogdoad, sometimes referred to as the middle region or Jerusalem above. Beyond this was the Pleroma, the divine fullness inhabited by perfect eons. Valentinian theology described a first Ogdoad consisting of 8 primordial eons, including Bethos, Sige, Nous, Aletheia, Logos, Zoe, Anthropos, and Ecclesia. Different schools of Valentinianism further developed this model, dividing the Ogdoad into distinct male-female pairs, 4+4, or associating it with Pythagorean numerology, emphasizing the tetrad, or a group of 4, as the basis of existence. Ultimately, the Ogdoad in Gnostic thought represented a higher transcendent realm, marking the boundary between the lower material world, the Kenoma, and the divine realm, the Pleroma. While rooted in astronomical and mythological traditions, its significance evolved in different Gnostic sects, reflecting their attempts to describe the structure of the cosmos and the path to spiritual liberation. And lastly for this tier, we have using psychedelics to achieve gnosis. Some researchers believe that ancient Gnostics may have used psychedelic substances to induce mystical states, allowing them to experience direct revelations of the divine. The use of psychedelics in Gnostic rituals is a topic of growing interest, particularly in relation to their connections with ancient mystery cults, such as the Eleusinian mysteries. In these classical traditions, initiates consumed a sacred drink, kykeon, to experience divine revelation. Kykeon likely contains psychoactive substances, specifically ergot alkaloids, which are a precursor to LSD. Given the influence of Neoplatonism and mystery cults on early Christianity, it's plausible that similar practices were adopted by some Gnostic sects. The emphasis on direct, ecstatic communion with the divine in Gnosticism mirrors the transformative experiences reported in mystery traditions. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from the accusations made by Irenaeus against Marcus the Valentinian. Marcus was a Gnostic teacher associated with the Valentinian school, which placed a strong emphasis on mystical knowledge and divine communion. Irenaeus claimed that Marcus seduced women using philters and love potions, leading them into states of intense devotion and passion. He also accused Marcus of mixing the Eucharist with a purple substance that induced the receivers to prophecy through mystical invocations. Irenaeus wrote that the women initially protest that they do not know how to prophesy, but under Marcus's influence, they entered an altered state, speaking words that they claim are divinely inspired. He also states that their hearts beat violently, they become excited in the soul, and they utter nonsense. This description aligns with known effects of entheogenic substances, which were often used in ancient rituals to induce altered states of consciousness. Orthodox Christianity's condemnation of such practices may have contributed to their suppression and eventual erasure from mainstream religious traditions. The similarities between Gnostic Christianity and pagan mystery cults further support the hypothesis that entheogens played a role in Gnostic rituals. Many Mediterranean religions, including the cults of Mithras, Serapis, and Dionysus, emphasize secret initiation ceremonies that often involve direct encounters with the divine. The worship of Serapis, in particular, was known to overlap with early Christianity, as Emperor Hadrian noted that Christians and Serapis devotees often worshipped in the same temples. Other Neoplatonist philosophers such as Iamblichus wrote extensively about trance states and visionary experiences achieved through fasting, music, and likely the use of sacred plants. Given the fluid exchange of religious and philosophical ideas between Gnosticism and these traditions, it is reasonable to conclude that Gnostic initiates may have used entheogens to facilitate their ascent to higher realms of spiritual knowledge. Early Christian groups influenced by Gnosticism such as the Ophites and the Fabianites were accused by church fathers of engaging in strange mystical rites, including the consumption of sacred substances. Some researchers speculate that these accusations may have been distorted accounts of legitimate psychedelic rituals, where ingesting certain plants or brews allowed practitioners to experience direct encounters with divine beings. The Mandaeans, as mentioned in an earlier tier being one of the last surviving Gnostic sects, still use ritual immersion in water and specific herbal mixtures as part of their spiritual practices, which could be remnants of earlier Gnostic traditions. If Gnostic mystics did use psychoactive substances to break through the Demiurge's deception, it would suggest that their teachings weren't just abstract philosophy, but were based on direct, altered states of perception, experiences that temporarily freed them from the control system of the material world. Whether through spontaneous visions, deep meditation, or chemical sacraments, the goal remained the same: to awaken the divine spark within and reunite with the true source of existence. First up is Aleister Crowley's Gnostic Mass. Aleister Crowley, the notorious occultist and founder of Thelema, wove Gnostic elements into his rituals, most famously in the Gnostic Mass, the central rite of the Ordo Templi Orientis. Officially called Liber 15, the Mass blends Gnostic cosmology, ceremonial magic, and sexual mysticism, creating a ritual that both mirrors and subverts the traditional Christian Eucharist. The ceremony involves 5 key officers: a priest, a priestess, a deacon, and 2 acolytes, with a Eucharist as the ritual's climax. The structure includes an invocation of thelemic deities, a symbolic resurrection of the priest by the priestess, the rending of the veil, 11 prayers, the consecration of the Eucharist, and the final proclamation of divine unity, where the congregation declares, "There is no part of me that is not of the gods." One of the more controversial aspects of the Mass is its sacred Eucharist, which is meant to charge participants with divine energy. This mirrors ancient Gnostic initiations, where consuming sacred foods was believed to facilitate spiritual transformation. The Eucharist consists of wine and the cake of light, which is made of flour, honey, abramelin oil, olive oil, bee swing, and bodily fluids, such as those that come from a man or a woman. Yes, those ones. The Eucharist is seen as a vessel of magical power, drawing from alchemical and tantric traditions that use the body's substances as conduits for spiritual energy. The ritual space includes 4 key elements: a high altar, an altar of incense, a font, and a tomb, symbolizing different mystical forces. The Mass blends ceremonial magic, sex magic symbolism, and elements of Gnostic thought, aiming to elevate participants into spiritual ecstasy while affirming their divine nature through the mysteries of thelema. For Crowley, Gnosis wasn't just about intellectual enlightenment, it was something visceral, ecstatic, and deeply embodied. He believed in achieving higher states of consciousness through ritual, sex magic, and direct communion with higher intelligences. The Gnostic Mass reflects this by rejecting the idea of external salvation and instead focusing on awakening the divine within. The Mass is structured around invocations, symbolic gestures, and a transmission of hidden knowledge, echoing the traditional Gnostic sacraments, but framed within the thelemic worldview of the Aeon of Horus. The Aeon of Horus, as described by Aleister Crowley, represents an age of self-realization, spiritual awakening, and individual will or thelema, moving beyond the past ages of Isis and Osiris, representing maternal worship and self-sacrifice respectively. Crowley claims this new era is marked by the conquering child, symbolizing growth in consciousness and mastery over fear, death, and rational limitation. He asserts that thelema is a revolutionary word akin to the teachings of Buddha and Muhammad, fundamentally reshaping religious, philosophical, and scientific understanding. At its core, the Gnostic Mass embodies Crowley's belief that Orthodox Christianity strips spirituality of its true ecstatic nature, replacing mystical experiences with rigid doctrine and dogmatic control. Like the Gnostics before him, Crowley saw mainstream religion as an oppressive force that disconnected people from direct spiritual knowledge. By incorporating Gnostic ideas into ceremonial magic, the Ordo Templi Orientis sought to reclaim lost mystical wisdom, placing the individual at the center of their own divine awakening, where enlightenment wasn't granted by a church, but achieved through will, ritual, and personal experience. Whether or not that is achieved by these rituals is up for debate. Next up we have Earth is a soul farm. A radical interpretation of Gnostic cosmology suggests that Earth isn't just a false reality, it's a literal soul farm, where human consciousness is harvested and recycled by the Demiurge or Archons. In this view, suffering isn't just an unfortunate part of existence, it's the fuel that keeps the system running. Human souls are trapped in an endless cycle of reincarnation, their memories wiped clean each time, ensuring they never progress beyond the material prison. Rather than living freely, humanity functions as a spiritual resource, feeding non-physical entities that thrive on fear, pain, and ignorance. Some versions of this theory argue that the entire reincarnation process is a carefully managed system designed to prevent escape. Souls are sent back into the cycle over and over, unable to remember past lives, forced to keep generating emotional energy that is absorbed by parasitic entities beyond human perception. Think the Matrix. Reports from near-death experiences sometimes describe a tunnel of light, leading back to reincarnation, but some who have had these experiences recall an eerie sense of coercion, like they were being guided back into the trap. The control mechanisms of this reality, according to the proponents of this idea, operate on multiple levels. Biological constraints like aging, disease, and physical needs keep people focused on survival, while societal structures, religion, government, financial systems ensure that humanity remains distracted, divided, and dependent. The concept of louche, a term popularized by Robert Monroe, refers to emotional energy harvested by non-physical entities, which fits with the idea that the Demiurge and his Archons feed off the suffering generated by human existence. In this interpretation, the Archons aren't just jailers, they're predators, actively manipulating human perception, emotions, and even thoughts to prevent people from realizing their divine origins. The Marsanes, one of the most obscure texts from the Nag Hammadi library, aligns with this unsettling perspective. It describes the material world as an intentional psychological and spiritual prison, where human perception is actively distorted to prevent enlightenment. Unlike other Gnostic texts that focus on cosmology or divine origins, Marsanes is deeply philosophical, dealing with consciousness itself, how it's manipulated, and how it can be freed. The text presents the mind as a battlefield, where external forces shape thought and perception to keep souls blind to their true nature. It describes multiple levels of spiritual ascent, but warns that each level is guarded by deceptive entities whose role is to convince the seeker that they have found the ultimate truth when they have not. This reinforces the idea that the Demiurge and his Archons create layers of false enlightenment, traps within traps, to keep even the most spiritually inclined souls contained within the system. Some interpretations of Marsanes suggest that the universe is multi-layered, with each higher level being a more refined illusion, meaning that even those who believe they've escaped the Demiurge's world may still be within his system. The only true way out, according to the text, is to go beyond thought itself, into a state of pure awareness that transcends all perception and illusion. It's a bleak but deeply profound vision of existence, one in which human consciousness is ensnared in an endlessly deceptive system, where every attempt to break free is met with more layers of illusion. But Marsanes doesn't just present the prison, it hints at a way out. If the illusions can be silenced, if the layers of deception can be stripped away, there is something beyond the Demiurge's world. If this interpretation is correct, then Marsanes isn't just another Gnostic text. It's a guide for those seeking to break free from the soul farm and awaken to their true, unbounded consciousness. Next, we have Sethianism as an ancient pre-demiurgic religion. A fringe theory suggests that Sethianism isn't just an early Gnostic tradition, it's a remnant of a cosmic religion that predates the creation of the material world itself. In this view, Sethian teachings existed before the Demiurge corrupted reality, meaning Sethian gnosis isn't simply an esoteric rebellion against a false god, but the last surviving fragment of an older, pure cosmic order, one that existed before the fall into matter. This interpretation suggests that the Sethian mysteries were once part of a divine system of knowledge established by higher aeonic beings before the material universe even came into existence. If the Demiurge's creation was an act of theft, stealing divine energy to fashion a counterfeit world, then Sethian teachings serve as an encoded memory of the original cosmic harmony that was lost. In this view, the true history of existence has been erased and overwritten by the Demiurge's illusion, and Sethianism represents the last attempt to preserve the knowledge of what came before. According to this theory, the world we inhabit is not merely a flawed creation of the Demiurge, but a counterfeit of a higher perfect reality. In this original divine world, human souls existed in fully realized forms, completely connected to the divine source. Unlike the more common Gnostic perspective that describes the human soul as containing only a small divine spark trapped within the material realm, this theory suggests that souls were originally whole, divine beings who lived in a perfect version of our material reality. It was only through the Demiurge's interference that some were severed from their divine state and imprisoned in the flawed copy that we now perceive as reality. The creation of the material world was, in essence, an act of imitation. The Demiurge, incapable of true creation, sought to replicate the higher world, but did so imperfectly, producing a distorted, fragmented version. Some of the divine beings from the true world were drawn into this false material realm, carrying with them the divine knowledge of Seth. These beings, though trapped, retain the awareness of their divine origins and serve as guides, attempting to awaken the divinity in others. Their mission is to remind those trapped in the Demiurge's world that their reality is a deception and that beyond it lies the true, uncorrupted existence. This interpretation of Sethianism claims that it predates the Demiurge's existence because it originates in the perfect world that the Demiurge attempted to copy. The true Sethian knowledge in this view is not a reaction to the Demiurge's flawed creation, but a remnant of a divine tradition that existed before the Demiurge even came into being. This perspective also aligns with certain Platonic ideas, particularly the notion that our world is an imperfect copy of higher realms of forms. However, it takes this idea further by suggesting that the Demiurge did not merely create a flawed reflection out of ignorance, but did so deliberately to deceive and ensnare souls. If this theory holds, then the goal is not just to escape the material world, but to restore the knowledge of the original divine existence that existed before the Demiurge's interference. Next up we have reptilians or Archons. David Icke's conspiracy theories take the Gnostic concept of the Archons in an unexpected direction, arguing that they aren't just spiritual or psychological forces, but literal shape-shifting reptilian beings who hold positions of power on Earth. According to Icke, these reptilian Archons control governments, financial institutions, religious organizations, and media networks, keeping humanity locked in a low vibrational state of fear, division, and ignorance. His theory blends Gnostic cosmology, ancient astronaut ideas, and modern conspiracy narratives, recasting the Demiurge and his Archons as an extraterrestrial ruling class that manipulates human perception and behavior from the shadows. Icke claims that these beings don't exist within the visible spectrum of reality, but in an interdimensional or extra-dimensional state. They supposedly maintain control through bloodline elites, secret societies, and occult rituals, feeding off human suffering, fear, and emotional turmoil, an idea that echoes the Gnostic belief that the Archons thrive on ignorance and illusion, keeping human souls trapped in the material world. Some interpretations of this theory link these reptilian Archons to ancient mythologies and religious traditions, pointing to serpent and dragon-like deities in Sumerian, Babylonian, and Mesoamerican cultures. Figures like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the Anunnaki of Mesopotamian myth, and the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl have all been cited as possible representations of these beings, reinforcing the idea that reptilian entities have been influencing human civilization for thousands of years. Supporters of Icke's theory believe there are signs of reptilian control hidden in plain sight, particularly in elite institutions that use serpent imagery, hidden hand gestures, and secretive initiation rituals. They argue that historical ideas like divine right, royal bloodlines, and rulers claiming descent from the gods all hint at a hidden lineage of non-human overlords shaping human affairs. The idea that Archons could be literal non-human beings rather than spiritual forces of oppression continues to circulate in esoteric and conspiracy circles. Whether taken literally or metaphorically, the idea of reptilian Archons taps into deep anxieties about hidden power structures, control, and the true nature of human reality. Interestingly, the Hypostasis of the Archons, one of the most detailed Gnostic texts from the Nag Hammadi library, describes the Demiurge and his Archons as monstrous, reptilian-like entities who rule over the material world. Unlike other Gnostic writings that describe the Demiurge in more abstract terms, this text gives a visceral, almost mythological depiction of the false creator, an image that aligns with modern interpretations of the Demiurge as an alien or non-human intelligence. In the Hypostasis of the Archons, the Demiurge is described as a lion-faced serpent with eyes like flaming fire, a chaotic and arrogant being who falsely claims to be the one true God, unaware of the higher divine realms beyond him. The Archons themselves are depicted as grotesque beings of various monstrous forms. Some interpretations suggest that these descriptions could be early references to extraterrestrial or interdimensional entities, similar to the Anunnaki or the Jinn of Islamic tradition, suggesting that the Archons may not just be metaphysical forces, but malevolent intelligences operating behind the scenes. This depiction of the Demiurge as a reptilian-like being with tyrannical ambitions resonates with modern conspiracy theories that see world leaders, corporate elites, and ruling families as either representatives or puppets of the Archons. If the Hypostasis of the Archons describes the false god as a beast-like entity ruling over a prison world, then what does that say about those who wield power in his name? And lastly for this tier, and for the entire Ultimate Gnosticism Iceberg, we have Tantric New Gnosis. The international Gnostic movement, founded by Samuel Allen Weor in the mid-20th century, teaches that sexual energy is the key to spiritual enlightenment and a deeper form of gnosis. Blending Gnosticism with esoteric Christianity, alchemy, and tantric traditions, this movement sees sexuality not as something to be repressed, but as a divine force that, when properly harnessed, can open the gates to higher consciousness. Unlike traditional Christian teachings, which often associate sexuality with sin or temptation, modern Gnostic groups in this tradition believe that sexual union, when practiced correctly, can accelerate spiritual awakening. At the heart of Weor's teachings is the idea of sexual transmutation, a concept drawn from both Western alchemy and Eastern Tantra. Rather than seeking physical gratification, practitioners are encouraged to refine and direct this energy to awaken the divine spark within. Weor argued that orgasm leads to spiritual degeneration, while controlled and intentional sexual practice without the loss of energy can generate inner light and propel spiritual evolution. This idea closely resembles certain Hindu and Buddhist tantric traditions, which emphasize channeling this energy through meditation, breathwork, and sacred rituals to reach higher states of consciousness. In this interpretation, sexual alchemy is a way to reverse the fall into materiality described in Gnostic thought. The material world created by the Demiurge is a trap that imprisons divine sparks within human bodies. Traditional religious institutions, rather than offering true liberation, often reinforce this imprisonment through doctrines that promote sexual repression and guilt. The new gnosis taught by these groups proposes that sexuality isn't something to be denied. It's something to be transformed, serving as a pathway to reclaim lost divine power. One of the key practices in the international Gnostic movement is sacred sexuality, which is meant to be practiced within marriage or committed partnerships. According to Weor, through disciplined practice, couples can activate dormant spiritual centers, awaken Kundalini energy, and even experience direct communion with the Pleroma. This, he claimed, allows practitioners to bypass the control of the Demiurge and his Archons, reclaiming their connection to higher dimensions of existence. Critics argue that these ideas stray far from classical Gnostic texts, where sexuality is often seen as part of the material entrapment of the soul, rather than a means of liberation. However, the international Gnostic movement claims that their teachings restore lost knowledge, a hidden path deliberately erased by the Church to keep humanity from realizing its divine power. Some speculate that early Gnostic groups, such as the Carpocratians and the Borborites, may have engaged in ritualized sexual practices. However, much of what is written about them comes from their critics, like Epiphanius of Salamis, who sought to portray them as heretical and immoral. Whether or not ancient Gnostics actually practiced sacred sexuality, the modern revival of sexual gnosis presents itself as a continuation of esoteric alchemy, arguing that by mastering sexual energy, practitioners can break free from the illusion of the Demiurge's world and return to the divine source. And that closes off the final tier of the ultimate Gnosticism iceberg. Thank you so much for sticking around this long. This video was a blast to make, so let me know what you thought. What topic interested you the most? And what do you think I should cover next on this channel? I would love to cover more esoteric traditions other than Gnosticism, but let me know what you're interested in. I look forward to reading through all your comments as always. And if you liked the video, please remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Until next time.